They built a fence around his entire ranch, and thought they'd won. They believed they could trap a man on his own land, strip him of his freedom, and walk away without consequence. But they didn't know Vernon Harris. And what they didn't expect was that he would outsmart them all by owning the very gate meant to keep him locked in. This is not fiction. This is a real story. And what happens next will leave you stunned. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy true stories of ordinary people standing up against abuse of power, stories with twists, justice, and unforgettable endings, this channel is for you. Now, let's begin. Vernon Harris was a 58-year-old Army veteran. He'd served 2 decades with honor, survived combat zones, and returned home not to rest, but to rebuild. With his savings and a bit of inherited land from his late grandfather, he poured his soul into a modest ranch on the outskirts of a quiet but growing town. This land had been in his family since the 1930s. For Vernon, it wasn't just property, it was legacy. The ranch sat peacefully at the edge of a rapidly developing suburb. For years, he lived without issue. But when a new housing development began construction nearby, Vernon noticed something strange. He started receiving letters, official-looking, typed envelopes stuffed in his mailbox, even though he wasn't subscribed to any local service. The letters came from the local HOA, the Homeowners Association for the new community. The first one was friendly, suggesting he consider aligning the appearance of his property with community aesthetics. Vernon laughed it off. He wasn't part of the HOA. His land predated the entire subdivision. But the letters kept coming. Over the months, they grew bolder. They claimed his barn was a violation of community standards. They said his fences were a visual disturbance. They objected to his tractor being visible from the main road. Vernon ignored every single one. He had no legal obligation to comply. Then came the visits. Men in polos and khakis with clipboards began showing up. They'd stand near the edge of his property, pointing, taking pictures, whispering among themselves. One afternoon, Vernon walked up to them calmly and asked, "Can I help you gentlemen?" One of them, a younger man with a tight smile, replied, "We're just surveying the neighborhood as part of the HOA's expansion plans." Vernon responded, "This isn't your neighborhood." They left. But something told Vernon they weren't done. A month passed. Then one morning, Vernon woke up to the sound of drilling. Not on his land, but right outside it. Dozens of workers were installing fence posts. Confused, Vernon approached them and asked what they were doing. One of the crewmen handed him a printed document. It wasn't addressed to Vernon, but to the HOA's construction contractor. The land surrounding Vernon's property, previously open pastureland, had been quietly purchased by a development company. That company was owned by members of the same HOA board. And they were now building a perimeter fence, completely around his ranch. Vernon was stunned. He rushed to the county office. The sale was legal. The land didn't belong to him, and it had been sold in small parcels over a few months. The buyer? A shell corporation tied to the same developer running the HOA. He was boxed in. According to county maps, Vernon's ranch was now landlocked. He could technically request an access agreement through the HOA, but it would require board approval, legal filings, and potentially months of negotiation. Still, they said there would be a gate. A single access point. Vernon wasn't happy, but if it gave him time to fight, he'd wait. 2 weeks later, the fence was finished. 12 feet tall. Chain link. Industrial. Completely surrounding his land. The only opening was on the eastern side, a metal gate with a keypad and a sign. Private access, HOA members only. Vernon stood in front of it, stunned. There was no code, no instructions. He called the number posted. A woman answered. "HOA office, how may I assist you?" Vernon said, "Yeah, I need the code to get out. I live on the land behind this fence." Her tone changed. "Sir, are you a registered HOA member?" "No," he replied firmly. "I've lived here for 20 years. This is my land." "Then I'm afraid we can't grant you access without board approval. You'll need to submit a request for temporary access while your case is reviewed." Vernon hung up, disbelief turning into rage. He called the sheriff's office. They arrived, looked at the fence, the gate, and the land map. After some discussion, the deputy said, "Technically, this is legal. The land you'd need to cross isn't yours. They can block it off. Your only option would be to sue." "But I can't leave," Vernon argued. "That's unlawful detainment." The officer looked sympathetic, but said, "It's complicated. You're not physically restrained, there's just no easement. It'll take time." So Vernon waited. For days, he watched birds fly over the very gate he couldn't walk through. Supplies ran low. He had some food stockpiled, water from his well, and fuel. But it wouldn't last forever. He considered cutting the fence, but knew the legal consequences could backfire. He had to be smarter. He spent the next few days thinking, planning. Then he called an old friend, Charles Mitchell, a former Army buddy who now worked in the county assessor's office. "I need a favor," Vernon said. "I need to know who owns the land the gate is built on. Just that little patch." Charles promised to dig. Vernon waited. 3 days later, Charles called back, and what he found changed everything. Charles sounded almost breathless. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The land under the gate, it's a 10 by 30-foot utility access plot. It was never sold. It's still owned by a private investor. Not the HOA. Not the developer." Vernon leaned forward. "You're telling me the entire gate is standing on land they don't own?" "Exactly." Charles gave him the name. The owner was an 82-year-old man living 3 states away. Vernon made a call. He introduced himself politely and explained the situation. The man, a retired contractor, remembered the parcel. He had bought it decades ago as part of a tax strategy and forgotten about it. Vernon offered him a generous price. The man accepted. Within a week, the paperwork was signed. Vernon was now the legal owner of the strip of land the HOA's gate rested on. And with that ownership came full control over access to everything beyond it. He didn't call the HOA. He didn't send a letter. He simply posted a notice on the gate. "Private access, property of V. Harris Ranch. Gate will be removed in 10 days unless agreement is reached." The HOA ignored him. They assumed it was a bluff. A scare tactic. But on day 10, Vernon returned to the gate, this time with a welding crew, a locksmith, and 2 uniformed sheriffs present to witness and document the removal. The keypad was dismantled. The gate was pulled open. For the first time in weeks, Vernon drove his truck through the path that belonged to him, and no one else. The HOA board was furious. They called emergency meetings, sent threatening letters, and even tried filing an injunction. But Vernon was prepared. He had legal title, a full chain of ownership, and a signed affidavit from the original owner. The case was dismissed before it ever reached court. That wasn't all. Because Vernon now owned that strategic 10 by 30-foot strip, he had leverage. The HOA couldn't legally install another gate or barrier without his permission. And he wasn't giving it. Eventually, the HOA relented. A new agreement was drafted, one Vernon had full control over. It granted him permanent, unimpeded access through the road. It also required the HOA to pay him a yearly maintenance fee for any use of that passage, now recognized as private property. But Vernon wasn't done. He partnered with Charles and began helping other residents dig through property records. What they found was stunning: dozens of land irregularities, illegal easements, and manipulated boundary lines pushed by the HOA over the years. Many residents, feeling powerless, had given in. Not anymore. Together, Vernon and Charles helped file 5 separate complaints. A community lawsuit formed. And within a year, 5 HOA board members had resigned under pressure. The developer company's expansion was halted pending investigation. Vernon had done more than open a gate. He had opened the door for an entire neighborhood to reclaim its voice. What started as a quiet rancher being locked behind a fence turned into a masterclass in strategic revenge. Vernon never raised his voice, never broke the law. He simply knew the one thing they underestimated: land matters. Ownership matters. Sometimes, the smallest piece of land holds the most power. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, if it made you think twice about what it means to truly own something, subscribe to our channel. Leave a like if you believe in standing your ground. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Vernon's boots?